back with the third chapter of Many Waters, which is called Japheth's sister Yalith, and I'm really enjoying this chapter. I'm learning all of this stuff just as you are. Yalith was walking home from Grandfather Lamech's, where Sandy is, and she reacted very strongly to seeing him. Her people live to be hundreds of years old. She's not quite 100 years old, but she is just beginning puberty. And this has brought the attention of Eblis, who is... Sorry, I'm looking to remember how to pronounce the name. Eblis is a Nephilim, who are very pale compared to a race of creatures that are also called the Seraphim, who the Nephilim make Yalith very uncomfortable. She knows that the one she met, Eblis, is very attracted to her. She sees one of her sisters, probably about to go off for a romantic evening with one of the Nephilim, and she's kind of tricked because the Nephilim can turn into animals. And Eblis turns into a big lizard, whereas she has a friend who is a seraphim that can turn into a lion that almost looks like the lizard. So Yalith is going back to her tent. She has to tell her mother that her sister is not coming home, that her sister is with the Nephilim, and we will begin there. It was the smell that brought Dennis back to consciousness. His nostrils twitched, his stomach heaved. There was a smell of cooking, smoky, rancid, a smell worse than the rotten cheese smell of silage which clung to the farmhands near home. A smell far stronger than that of the manure spread on the fields in the spring. That was a fresh growing smell. This was old manure rotting, a smell that made the urinals in the lavatories at school seem sweet, and over it all, but not covering it, a cloying smell of perfume and sweat, body sweat, which had never been near a shower. He opened his eyes. He was in an enclosed space, lit by the moonlight pouring through a hole in what seemed to be some kind of curved roof, and by the equally brilliant light which poured from the unicorn's horn. The silver creature looked around, sniffing, pawing the dirty earthen floor. At its feet, a mammoth cringed. Denny almost cried out, "Higgaion!" But this mammoth was not the one who had accompanied Japheth. This mammoth had matted fur on its flanks, and it was so thin that the skeleton showed through. Its eyes were dulled, and it seemed to be apologizing to the unicorn. Staring at the unicorn, still unaware of Denny's, were several small people. But just as the mammoth was unlike Higgaion, so these people were unlike Japheth. They smelled. The men's bodies were hairy, giving them a simian look. Their goatskin loincloths were not clean. There were 2 full-bearded men and 2 women, naked except for loincloths. Both the women had red hair, and the younger woman's hair was so vivid it almost seemed like flame, and some care had been taken with it. The older woman was wrinkled and discontented-looking. The unicorn's light flashed against the younger woman's green eyes, making them sparkle like emeralds. "You see?" she cried triumphantly. "I knew our mammoth could call us a unicorn." The light in the horn dimmed. The younger of the 2 men, who had matted brown hair and a red beard unkempt and spotted with food, snarled at the girl. "And now, dear Sister Tigla, that we have a unicorn in the tent, what do you want of it?" The girl approached the unicorn, her hand held out as though to pet it. The horn blazed with blinding brilliance, and then the tent was dark so suddenly that it took several seconds for Denny's eyes to adjust to the moonlight coming through the hole in the roof. The men roared with laughter. "Oh, Tigla, you thought you could fool us, didn't you?" Even the older woman was laughing. Then she saw Denny's, who was struggling to his knees. "Great Art, what have we here?" the red-headed girl gasped. "A giant!" The older, bow-legged man approached Denny's. He held a spear, and Denny's, gagging from the stench in the tent, felt an overriding surge of fear. The man nudged him with the spear so that he fell back onto a pile of filthy skins. The man flipped him over, using the spear, which scratched but did not cut him. He felt the tip of the spear as it was drawn lightly along his shoulder blades. "Is this one yours, Tigla?" the man asked. "I thought you were seeing a Nephil." Tigla looked curiously at Denny's. "He is no Nephil." The older woman stared. "If he's a giant, he's a baby giant. He can't hurt us." "What will we do with him?" Tigla asked. The brown, hairy man withdrew his spear. "Throw him out." His voice had no particular malice. Denny's was just a thing to be disposed of. He felt two pairs of hands lifting him, as the younger man helped his father. The mammoth whimpered, and the older woman kicked at him. Certainly Denny's thought anything would be better than this horrible-smelling place, full of horrible little people. There was a brief whiff of fresh air, a glimpse of a night sky crusted with stars, a smoky redness on the horizon, like the light from some enormous industrial city. Then he felt himself being thrown like offal. He felt himself rolling down a steep incline. He gagged, vomited. He had been thrown into what was evidently a garbage dump. It was even worse than wherever he had been before. He managed to pull himself up onto his knees. He was in some kind of pit. There was an overwhelming stench of feces, of rotting flesh. He did not know what else was in the pit with him. He did not want to know. Frantically, he scrambled up the side, climbing, slipping on bones, on ooze, on decaying filth, sliding back, climbing, sliding, slipping, scrabbling, until at last he pulled himself out and up onto his feet and stood there tottering, filthy and terrified. There was no sign of Sandy, no sign of the unicorn, or of Japheth and Higgaion. He had no idea where he was. He looked around. He was standing on a dirt patch which bordered the pit. Beside it was his rolled-up bundle of clothes. On the other side of the path were a number of tents. He had seen pictures of Bedouin tents in his social studies books at school. These were similar, though they seemed smaller and more closely clustered. It was probably from one of these tents that he had been thrown. Beyond the tents were palm trees, and he staggered toward these. He needed to shower. Did he ever need to shower? He carried with him the smell of the pit. He ran, barely keeping himself upright, to the grove of palms. Beyond these, he could see white sand in the desert. If he could only reach the desert, he could roll in the moon-washed sand and get clean. "Sandy!" he called, but there was no Sandy. "Jay! Jay!" But no small young man appeared. "Higgaion!" he shuddered. If he never saw any human being again, he would not go back to the tent where he had been poked at with a spear, and from which he had been thrown like garbage. Racing, he was suddenly out of the grove of palms and sliding in sand. He fell down, rolled, and picked up handsful of sand and rubbed it over himself, wiping off the slime and filth of the pit. He pulled off his turtleneck and flung it away, rolled again in the sand. His underclothes were filthy from the pit, and he tore them off, flinging them after the turtleneck. He did not even realize that he was scraping off his own sunburned skin, so eager was he to get clean. The sand was cool under the daisy field of stars, and he took off his sneakers and socks, flinging them after his clothes. They would never be clean again. He rubbed more sand on his feet, his ankles, his legs, not even realizing he was sobbing like a small child. After a while, from sheer exhaustion, he calmed down, began to assess his situation. He was badly sunburned. He had made it worse by scouring himself with sand. He was shivering, but it was not from cold, it was from fever. He sat there, naked as Adam, on the white desert, his back to the oasis. The not yet full moon was sliding down toward the horizon. Above him there were more stars than he had ever seen before. Ahead of him was that strange reddish glow, and then he saw it. It came from a mountain, the tallest in a range of mountains on the far horizon. Of course, if he and Sandy had somehow or other blown themselves onto a young planet in some galaxy or other, naturally volcanoes would still be active. How active? He hoped he wouldn't find out. At home, the hills were low old hills, worn down by wind and rain, by the passing of the glaciers, by eons of time. Home, he began to sob again. With a great effort, he calmed himself. He and Sandy were the practical ones of the family, the ones who had found solutions to problems. They could do minor repairs when the plumbing misbehaved. They could rewire an old lamp and make it work again. Their mother's reading lamp in the lab was the one they had bought at a church bazaar and made over for her. Their large vegetable garden in the summer was their pride and joy, and they sold enough of their produce to augment their allowances considerably. They could do anything, even believe in unicorns. He thought of the unicorn he had come to think of as a virtual unicorn, and who had, somehow or other, brought him to the tent of horrible, primitive little people who had thrown him into the pit. The sad, undernourished mammoth evidently had called the unicorn, and Denny's had been called back into being too, but the unicorn had gone out in a blaze of light. A unicorn, even a virtual one, evidently could not stand the smell. All right, if he thought that a unicorn couldn't stand the ugliness of the smell, it must mean he believed in unicorns, virtually. Of course, there were no unicorns, but neither was it possible that he and Sandy, tapping into their father's partially programmed experiment, could have been flung to wherever in the universe they were, on a backward planet of primitive life forms. Again he looked around. The stars were so clear that he seemed to hear a chiming of crystal. From the mountains came a wisp of smoke, a small tongue of fire. "Oh, virtual unicorn!" he cried. "I want to believe in you, and I don't care. I want to believe in you, and if you don't come, I will die." He felt something cool and soft touching his bare body. And there was the scraggly little mammoth, touching him tentatively with the pink tip of its long gray trunk. And then a burst of silver blazed in front of him and was reduced to a shimmer. A unicorn knelt before him on the sand. Denny's did not have the strength to mount the unicorn and sit astride. He gave the mammoth a look of mute gratitude, then draped himself over the unicorn's back. He closed his eyes. He was burning with fever. He would burn the unicorn. He felt that they were exploding like the volcano. And we will pause there.